Hello, everybody, and welcome to another great episode of Truth Wanted. I'm your host, as always, Objectively Dan, and joining me tonight is the one and only David Worley from the David Worley podcast. What's going on, David?
Hello.
Hey. Now, some of you might be wondering, well, wait a minute. I thought Kyle from Nonsec was coming on tonight, and that's true. Kyle has a fever, and he just let me know about that about 2 hours ago. And so, this stuff kind of happens, right? So I have a retainer list of people I usually go through. But recently, Christy was on David's show, and David did make the comment, yeah, I had Dan on my show one time. He hasn't had me on Truth Wanted yet. So you know what? I got him on this week, and I'm giving him a hard time, but David's a great guy. He has a podcast on YouTube where he gets some pretty big names in the community and does interviews with them. It's really nice to have you on here, David.
Thank you. I do want to clarify.
Of course you do. Of course you do.
As I already have about 4 times off air, I haven't bullied my way on. This is half earned. I mean, you're a mod on my channel. This is like
there you go.
The least you could do.
No, David. I've known David since. That's been a while. I don't know how long it's been. He's been doing his. We've been chugging together on YouTube, and where our communities kind of cross paths and stuff. So I'm happy to have David on, and I'm glad to have him on such short circumstances, especially where he's at. He's in the UK right now, where it's like 1 o'clock in the morning. So give him some room to find his thoughts and stuff. Because the later we go on, I'm sure it's going to get his thoughts are going to get a little less coherent, as time moves on. But again, David, I'm so glad you're here. Kind of tell people who have never seen you before, like what your show is about and kind of what you're doing.
I was gonna say I'm already incoherent, so there's no hope. I do a channel called DRP. There's going to be a new intro going to be released on Monday that fully elaborates on the rebrand, as it were. So DRP is the middle letters of Worley DR podcast, with me being obviously Worley DR and it being a podcast. But it's going to change to DRP, standing for Dave Does Religion and Politics. And this is, just to clarify, it's something that I find very interesting when I get, as you've already mentioned, a particular famous atheist on, but we already know their views on particular things. What do they think about it might be your president, it might be Brexit, it might be to do with something futuristic, climate change, all these different people. I don't know how many names should I say before you have to shut me up?
I mean, I will say, like, when I was on your show, I was surprised by the questions you were asking me. I believe you were asking me my thoughts.
Yes, you were.
You were asking me about, like, Brexit and some other stuff. I was like, oh, I'm not ready. My takes are not hot enough yet. I'm so used to. I mean, we talk a little bit of politics here and there on here, but I'm mostly interested in discussions about religion, discussions about conspiracies, and discussions about beliefs and what people have and stuff. And talking about the other stuff is great when I get to it, but it's not like I wouldn't call it my expertise, right? It's definitely not exactly why I do the things that I do. I mean, it's part of it, but like
neither would I.
Yeah, but like I'm glad that you're kind of asking those questions, because I think it's interesting. Like, yeah, I would want to know, like, Dan Barker's take on some things going on in our country or stuff, and kind of the guests that you've had on your show. So yeah, it's a different take on YouTube. I kind of like it.
Yeah, I have really struggled to try and frame it properly. I've gone by many sort of monikers in the past, so it's trying to make atheists relatable. It's trying to get to know them more personally. It's about me having conversations with various individuals. So I'll go through them, but please stop me after a while.
Sure.
I've had people like David Fitzgerald, Aaron Ra, Cosmic Skeptic, Richard Carrier, ObjectivelyDan, Daryl Ray, Dan Barker, Lloyd Evans, No Illusions, Scientist Mel, Carl Curtis. It's everyone you've ever heard of has been on the channel, probably, apart from the very big names, which is quite difficult to get in touch with.
So, okay, tell me this, because how do you get in touch with all of these people? Like, these are people who, I mean, they're very busy people. Like, first of all, I'm flattered that I'm even on the list of some of those people, right? But like, I mean, what's your secret? Do you have a form that you send to everybody that's just the most enticing thing ever? Like, what do you do?
No, it most certainly isn't. Whatever you receive, which I can't remember what, it must have been an email at some point. It wasn't even Twitter. It's really, there is no secret. It's just catching people at the right moment. Aaron Ra responded within an hour. I know he's sometimes very responsive.
Mm-hmm.
I can't quite remember somebody who I had maybe last month. I can't remember their names. They were, it might have been Phil Ferguson, actually. He was just happened to be like, I happened to get him like a week before the tax week. Like, I shouldn't have had him on. Like, he would have been too busy, but he was very kind. We had a really good podcast about secular finance and that sort of thing.
Right. Yeah, the thing about Arn is, I love Arn, but it took him a few times for him to meet me to remember who I was, and that he's actually met me before. I think he knows who I am now. I think if Arn walked in the room, he would recognize me. I think it's gotten to that point. But I've met him several times at just several different places, and he always forgets. And I get it. Like, he meets people like every day. Like, that's kind of his thing. But it's just kind of funny.
Yeah.
He has expressed interest on being on here as well. So we'll have to set that up sometime. But yeah, that's funny, man. Like, I know as a guy who's making the show here, like, trying to get people on and stuff, to me, sometimes it's kind of a hassle. Sometimes, people don't know who you are and stuff like that. And just seeing the level of people that you get on is really interesting to me. Like, that's impressive, dude. Like, props to you for getting to be able to talk to all these people, especially, people who a lot of people look up to and stuff like that. So what is it like to, like, have a show doing this kind of stuff where you're talking to people? Are you asking them the questions that you would want to know the answer to, or are you kind of asking questions you think other people would know? Like, what's it like just doing that whole process?
Yeah, well, excuse me. There's a process where I go through various people's Twitter, like within the past day of having them on. So there's something at least relevant. I go through their YouTube channel if they have one. They might, in some cases. There's people that I know would want to come on, and I don't know enough yet. Like, I want to randomly stumble upon an opinion while going through Twitter and being like, I didn't realize that about this person. I'm going to bring that up. I'm going to remember that. And try and link sort of that view into this view. So you can link things very easily into one another. Like, the common one that's going around at the minute is because it's Pride Week, month.
Yes, Pride Month.
Sorry, yeah. You can tell I'm straight because I wouldn't know.
Your privilege is
I
showing.
don't even know these things.
Yeah.
Oh, for the record as well, I don't think we need a straight Pride Week. Like,
no. Oh yeah. I was actually going to bring this up if you weren't. Have you seen this on Twitter? This straight pride thing that's happening in Boston.
Oh, it's actually happening. It's not just like.
Well, so I don't know. I haven't read up to about it. I just saw some headlines. I haven't seen much more, and a few people commenting on it. But just the idea of it, like I don't know. Before we get into this, I just do want to remind people this is a call-in show. We do have the number on screen. Definitely come talk to us about this kind of stuff. But this is a good topic to kind of segue and maybe talk about first, because I don't know, because recently on YouTube you've seen the Pastor McMurtry thing, and Mr. Atheist made that video, and they're talking about the Make America Straight Again conference that's been happening. And I was really going to get into it with Kyle tonight, but this straight pride parade thing also, it just it's so silly. Like, I don't know. It just really spits in the face of what the LGBT community has really tried for many years to kind of make happen. Like, I get why people don't like pride in some ways, but like I also do think that people take pride for granted in a lot of ways too, right? Like, oh, this used to not be a thing. Like this, cops and LGBT people walking together on the street was like not a thing a few years ago, and it's kind of amazing that it's even a thing at all. And the straight pride stuff, I don't know, it's just silly to me. Like, it's the people who are privileged who think that they're having their rights taken away from them in some way because it seems like gay people are being treated just like everybody else,
Yeah, it's not really. I realize how much of a bubble I live in, because we don't experience such antagonism towards these particular groups in this scale that you do. I don't get as much on my feed on Twitter, for example. If I'm just scrolling through about the UK, it's going to be more to do with Brexit than it is to do with, hey, let's kill lots of people. That those people do exist, obviously, but it constantly feels like, if I may say so, I'll word it in a slightly different way. Europe is more developed and is more social, and we're much more open to things like socialism than America, for example. And when you get these sorts of incidents coming along, it's shocking, obviously, but I just didn't realize these people even existed.
Yeah, I mean, I'm assuming you're talking about people who are just really bigoted towards like LGBT people and stuff. Is that what you?
Yeah. I definitely don't experience that. Obviously, I think it'd be different. It's a generational thing as well. So I can only assume from the people who I've spoken to, people such as ourselves, Christy, for example, we amongst ourselves, it's fine. Like there is no issue. But when we end up talking about these particular religions and how they have a lot of control, and that it seems like a thing in which they don't really care about the issue too much. It's more to do with gaining more control of the situation rather than, it seems like a power grab from the outside.
The experience that I've seen of it, and again, everyone's experiences are going to be varied, but most people I know who are against those kinds of things, it's more about keeping the status quo, I've seen a lot of times, than it is for like outright bigotry. The bigotry is still there, and I think it's an underlying thing. Like I do think people have presumptions and unconscious judgments, and that's where a lot of these decisions kind of stem from in the first place. But it's to the point where it's like, oh, we don't even realize that keeping the status quo in some cases is actually contributing to the bigotry. You see what I mean? Like it was just recently passed here that the Equal Rights Act, I think is what it was, with the Supreme Court, basically like not. We have a list of things you can't discriminate as an employer, right? And we just added like LGBT peoples as one of those things. Like you can't discriminate against somebody because they're gay for like hiring them and stuff. And it's like to some people that's going to be seen as like a hindrance, because it's like, oh, this is I used to be able to discriminate against these people and now I can't do that anymore, so they're taking away my rights. Like that's kind of an argument that gets made, but it really just doesn't it doesn't make sense if you look at it too closely. And if anything, it's obviously it's offensive to people, right, who have had to struggle in those situations because they've been discriminated against. And it's still even making a law about it doesn't necessarily stop the discrimination from happening, right? Like, this stuff happens off the books like all the time. It's just, usually it doesn't always get to court because, it's a hassle for some people. Some people just can't make the time to do that stuff. And people don't always have the evidence they need to prove those sort of things, even though they might know, just from having conversations with people like, yeah, this is the situation that's going on,
Probably I want to add to that by saying, I think from the year or so that I've been around this sort of environment, at first the channel wasn't up and running really. I do see an increased tendency towards irrational conversation which wasn't there before, and it already existed, but I just wasn't aware of it. And now I've gone into, much like this channel, I've gone through my own epistemology and tried to realize certain things that I've justified, say 8 years ago. I haven't even thought of that particular thing. I thought, oh yeah, that's a really stupid idea. Like it doesn't affect anything, but it's like it's something that sort of just hits you. I completely get it.
Well, I think what it is when you get involved in a community like this, you kind of talk about stuff that the average person doesn't always talk about every day. You know, like LGBTQ rights and stuff. Like, I don't think, I mean, maybe in Austin that gets brought up a lot more, but like it's not a conversation that happens every day at my work. It's not a conversation that happens every day in my family and other places like that. And so like when you get to communities like this where you're challenged more, like you come to think about things more. Like I would have never even considered the idea of being vegan, or it would have even crossed my mind if I wasn't surrounded by other people who were asking me questions about that kind of stuff. Like, well, hey, why aren't you vegan yet? Like, what's your thoughts on this and that? It's like, yeah, I don't know. I hadn't examined it yet. So
bothering you with their ideology.
Well, so I don't see it that way. Maybe I'm not jaded enough, and I know there's other people, especially around here, who don't like having conversations about the vegan stuff. It hasn't bothered me enough to where I don't want to talk about it. Surely, I think it's there's definitely more for myself to learn about it as well. I got to talk to Cosmic Skeptic about it actually a little bit when he was here a few weeks ago, and that made me think about some things. He's got that video about that. It's just interesting ideas that you wouldn't always consider, because I get to surround myself by cool people, and cool people get to call and ask about different things. So
I on that topic, I do have a response video to that specific.
Yes,
video.
You do. Yeah. And I didn't get to, but yours was in response kind of against Alex on that, right? Like you kind of pushed back a little bit.
Well, I pushed back.
Yeah.
I just to clarify, I don't want to ruin the video for everyone, but I ultimately, the hook, the bait is that I think there will be a point in the future where carnivorism will be the most moral option.
Whoa. Hot
within
take.
Our lives.
Hot take. That's a hot take, David.
This is the point where I walk off and pretend that I've got internet connections. I've got a phone call. Sorry.
Well, okay, that would be the perfect time for me to ask you, like, why you think about that. That's so interesting to me. I didn't realize that was your position on that, but this is right about the time to get to callers now. Maybe it'll come up kind of organically in the show. Maybe if somebody calls in about it, we can talk about it more. But I do want to get to some callers.
Brexit, that's fine.
Right.
Just nothing controversial.
I gotcha. Well, you ready to take some calls with me, David?
Sure.
All
Absolutely.
right. Cool.
Yeah, go for it.
Well, I want to get to first Theo in Switzerland. Theo, what is up?
Whew.
Hey, guys.
Hey.
How are you doing?
Doing awesome. Theo, I think you're my very first call from Switzerland, which is fantastic, man. Tell me what you want to talk about.
Yeah, my topic was basically natural law philosophy.
Okay.
I'm on the Discord of ACA and having some discussions there. Mm-hmm. And I'm always I've had some quite strong controversial discussions with other philosophers who always come with the is-ought problem. And I told them that has been solved long time by law. Both American and European law is based on natural law philosophy, based on scientific approach, based on human rights, what we want to grant everybody. And I think that's very important to, basically enforce on everybody those inalienable rights.
Yeah, so I know what you're talking about, but kind of break it down for the audience so that they kind of maybe get up to speed if they've never heard about this kind of stuff before.
And me.
Yeah, so the idea is philosophy often says you can't get an ought from an is, so you can't have facts leading to a clear normative what you should do. That's basically the core of it.
Yeah, so I guess I'm more interested in talking about like inalienable rights. Like, should we enforce human rights on everyone is kind of the note that I had here about this call, which I think is a really interesting question. First of all, what is your take on that, Theo?
My take on is we should enforce minimal humanitarian international laws on everybody. That's what the European Court of Human Rights does. You can pull everybody who signed into their Charta to any violation of a human right they declare. And every nation will be forced to execute their rulings if they violate international law.
And what is, if you could, because I'm sure you have multiple reasons, but maybe give me like one big or two big reasons why you think this should be the case.
The biggest reason is so we can have an objective ethic standard we compare every law with, and we can make sure people aren't violated their really basic rights we want to grant everybody. Like, for example, Germany, 1933, the Nazis killing Jews. We would feel the ought to act, the ought to intervene and to stop them, the genocide.
So you think if before 1932, like if we had some sort of international accord like we do now, as far as our humanitarian laws, that we could actually prevent that kind of particular disaster and maybe other disasters? Exactly.
That's why we founded the League of Nations, which later became the United Nations, UN.
And what do you think about, like the UN has been criticized over the years because of its inability to kind of handle certain problems and stuff. Do you think that's a result of just bureaucracy, or do you think is it something with
I think that's exactly the angst many people have to enforce international law on everybody. They don't want to violate the autonomy of a country, but if you are in the situation of 1933 where there is genocide, you have to intervene, otherwise you're unethical by not protecting the other lives,
Interesting. David, do you have an opinion on this?
Well, hello, Theo. My first thought goes to Crimea and that sort of issue in Ukraine with Russia successfully attempting to annex it. I am by no means an expert in that particular area. I don't know if you, because you are geographically slightly closer to it than me, I don't know if you had a particular opinion on that.
Yeah, I think it's also an international human people's law that self-determination is untouchable. So every nation, every people should be able to determine their own nationality. So basically everything against democratic independence is against international humanitarian law. The problem is often the UN has too few power, or some members aren't willing to act. So they always vote if they take any action, so what has to be done.
Could I quickly follow that one up as well? While you were speaking, I immediately thought of two things. One, Kosovo, to which I'm also not an expert on that particular situation. And secondly, we just had the EU election period at the end of last month, and Italy's biggest party, I think from memory, was Lega, and they in the past have, at least possibly now as well, advocated for North and South Italy to become two different countries. Would you support such a move?
Generally, according to international law, no government is able to split and determine what a nation is. No government is able to abandon regions. Everything must be democratically voted by the population of that place. So when the population of that place votes for independence, we have to respect it. But what they cannot vote is any law conflicting with international humanitarian law. So if they would vote on anything against that, like Nazi Germany, we would have to intervene. We would have to stop them and say, hey, if you're going in this direction, we come with our army and will protect the others.
Excellent, excellent. So democracy is kind of the foundation by which we decide the autonomy of individual nations and groups of people is kind of what you would say your standard is, right? Like as long as the region, the people of a specific region are voting. I'm trying to think of like, I mean, there's tons of different examples. Like, I mean, the Kosovo thing is one of them. You know, like Spain,
Catalonia and Spain.
Yeah, you know, like so. Wow. Okay, because you know, I have dabbled in like anarchist philosophy before, and you know, the anarchists. I mean, there's obviously wide range of texts and thoughts and theories, but you know, part of it does say like just being born into a nation and having its laws and things are things that you as a person never necessarily consented to or agreed to, right? I was born as a United States citizen and I'm subjugated to the United States law and stuff, even though I was never a part of most of the laws that were made in that process and stuff. And some would say that is a violation of my autonomy in some sense. Would you extend that to your philosophy as well? Would you say that does it go that far?
If you go close to the law, it isn't, because you would be able to self-determinate. If you have a group of people which you could say, now we are a state, you should have the international law against every other national law that you can self-determinate and be independent as a state. You just have to obey the international humanitarian laws. That's the golden frame we set for every nation. Basically.
Yeah. Okay. So it kind of falls back to that international accord that you're talking about, right? Yeah. Man, I don't know. I think I would have a tendency to agree. I would say personally, it seems that the most amount of work and protections get done when a certain number of countries agree on kind of the standards of what needs to be done, right?
Exactly, yeah.
And we have, although accidents and incidents seem to have happened, since World War II, it hasn't seemed to gotten to the same level as it once did. Of course, that could just be a fluke, you know. Where it hasn't been that long since the wars. Certainly, there's more history to happen, and time will tell whether the current arrangements we have will even hold, right? So, like, obviously, the breaking up of the EU and some other stuff has been happening internationally and stuff, and those have an effect.
Well, but that's independence and such thing are nothing compared to genocide or slavery, you know. If you look at Myanmar,
that's true.
Burma.
Yeah, and you know, like, but we also still have countries today that run independently, that aren't being held to the same like international standards and stuff, like North Korea and like Burma and other places, who are suffering from those human rights abuses.
The problem is we don't enforce the human rights there, and we don't do it even in the United States. You don't accept the European courts, and you cannot be sued for violation of human rights because you don't accept the Charta, which the European nations do. And I'm from Switzerland. We're not even in the European Union, but we also agree that international law is the highest, and you cannot violate human rights here, no matter what the national autonomy says.
Yeah, because the EU thing, I mean, that... Yeah, it's not necessarily a human rights well, I guess, there's some arguments that say it could be because of like the way that migration works between countries and stuff, but it is more economic than it is necessarily on the human rights level of things. Like when I think of human rights violations, I'm thinking of, you know, like genocides and stuff like
torture, waterboarding.
Yeah, things that are happening and stuff. And yeah, you're right. Even the United States also participates in some of that if we're looking at like Guantanamo Bay and stuff like that too. So
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you know,
that's for me is unjust. We should fight against torture. We should fight against genocide and slavery in every nation, independent whatever they think and voted for. That's my point.
And you think the best way to do that is by having nations agree to like an international, you know, standard, right?
NATO.
Yeah.
Have an international standard, a minimal standard which we all want to grant everybody, and then a real army to enforce it and real mechanisms for every nation.
So like a separate army that like the UN, like a separate force, or like country.
It must be independent.
Must be independent.
Because if the government of one nation turns against the human rights, the other nations must be able to intervene. So this balance of powers must always be.
But what do you think of, because, you know, we do have, I mean, the UN does function and it does have member states who vote on these kinds of issues on whether or not countries are in violations of some stuff. And I'm trying to think of, you know, like China and Russia are also on the board of like human rights violations when it comes to like stuff in North Korea, or I'm also trying to think of like stuff with Saudi Arabia and stuff like that hasn't been addressed because of certain member states having interests in the, you know, what goes on in Saudi Arabia and stuff. Do you think that's, again, like, is that a flaw of the current system? Is that a flaw because of some other factors, or like, do you have explanation?
Yeah, the flaw is it's not binding. It's not obligatory to respect the human rights. And Saudi Arabia, USA, and nations like that don't respect it.
Yeah, so it comes down to obligation for you, is what you're saying. Like it has to be.
We should enforce it on everybody.
Okay.
Like this,
Okay.
And every philosopher tells you, no, there is this is-ought problem. You can't say you should intervene. You can't say you should violate their autonomy. Because if you're going, that's the other part of law philosophy, which is law positivism, is that everything is just made up. You know, there is no absolute standard. And you have to get an absolute standard to compare everything for justice. Otherwise, you cannot say civil disobedience is okay. You know, you have no right to civil disobedience if every law, which is formally okay, is just. So basically, you need those quasi-objective standards.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you know, like, I'll let David talk after this because Lord knows I've been talking. But like, yeah, even if, you know, there is the is-ought thing, I think even if philosophy doesn't provide the answer to things, which I think it does sometimes, but, you know, like humans are going to make that should anyway, right? Like, even if it's not the most philosophically correct thing ever, like humans are going to do what they're going to do, right? They're going to protect themselves. They're going to, you know, strive for that independence and autonomy when they can, and have better control over their own lives. Like it seems to be the natural path that humans take. And I think I'm in agreement with you in that our laws should be reflective of that. Our laws should probably be in protection of, you know, human rights violations, probably more strongly than they are now. I like what you're putting out here, Theo. I don't have any other thoughts. David, do you have anything on this?
I wanted to quickly clarify something from about 4 years ago when it wasn't actually, it was about 10 minutes ago, but I think we said Kosovo and I think we meant Catalonia, because Catalonia is the breakaway from Barcelona, from Spain.
Yes.
Kosovo is a breakaway from, I think it's Switzerland.
Well, both, really. I think.
Serbia.
Yeah.
Oh,
well, Serbia, I apologize, yeah.
Well, both situations apply as far as like autonomy, that I think was the general theme, right?
Yeah.
Like we could say the same thing about like Kurdistan or something, you know.
No, that's basically the right for self-determination.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's also right for life, right for non-discrimination, all that stuff. So you can have multiple human rights violated, which should be enforced. And I think we have to fight to enforce them. Many people think, no, you don't have a right, you don't have a should to violate anybody's autonomy. And I think that's unethical and dangerous.
It's a constant it's a constant back and forth as to how to implement this in reality. Because we completely agree with the theory, but when we come across these sorts of issues, it's often, particularly if I frame it within the realm of Brexit, there's a fight between working together internationally and self-determination. And so, as much as I am Remain voter pro-European. I haven't changed my opinion on that. It's how do we go about convincing certain people that still, even before we get into European politics, they feel so distanced from their own government, and then an extra layer of bureaucracy is now above that. What do we do for those people to convince them that actually this is the desirable path forward?
Good question.
How do we convince people who are not convinced that human rights are higher priority than, say, national autonomy?
Yeah. So particularly on a very specific note, given the recent EU elections and the even more recent last night's, we had a by-election, which means a member of our parliament had to stand down on criminal charges, and there was another vote to see who could represent that 650th of the country, and each area gets their own representative in parliament, including our Prime Minister, who recently resigned yesterday as well. The Brexit Party, who, as far as I'm aware, they have one policy, and it's Nigel Farage's party, and that is just leave, no deal, which is, to put it politely, I think that's wrong, but they got the largest percent of vote. They got something like 34% of the EU election vote. These are people that just want go now. They don't want to have this conversation. They've already heard the arguments. They claim to know what they voted for, and let's say, for argument's sake, they do know what they're voting for.
Why don't you let them? I mean, that's not against any humanitarian international law, so I think every independence should be granted. Only if they start to think, hey, we should genocide those or we should enslave those, then you have a problem and we have to intervene. But I think it's basically those human rights are inalienable, so that means you don't vote on them and you cannot dispense of them. We just granted everybody, even Saudi Arabians and American citizens, basically would have to obey those, or we would feel justified to intervene. So it's like the highest standard we enforce on everybody to grant everybody the maximal liberty.
Sure.
And I think the human rights aren't enough yet. You said you were born in the USA and you didn't choose it, and that's totally right. If you had the human right for, say, free person traffic on the whole world, you could choose to leave the USA and choose another country or self-determination, make your own country, and be really free, which is not the case right now. And those autonomy things are conflicting with national law. National law says, no, we don't split up Catalonia or Kosovo. That's not even possible to vote on. But that's a human right law which is higher priority by most law philosophers. So we should grant them the right to independence, and we should grant the right to free person traffic, that you can live everywhere you want on Earth, in my opinion.
Well, this is a topic that we never really talked about here before, and I'm glad we got to talk about it with you, Theo. You give me some stuff to think about as far as the prioritization of human rights above all other kinds of things to prioritize, and like how that plays out on the international scale. I'd love to talk to you about this again, Theo. This has been a great call. Thanks again.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. I'm a big fan of you all. Anthony, Dan, Matt, ACA, whole thing.
Yeah. Matt's here. He's playing Keyforge. I can see him. It's pretty cool. Anyway,
Can I quickly interject as well? Theo, a couple of things. The Nations League finals are going on at the minute. Do you have a score prediction for Sunday?
No.
Are you aware of the football? It's England, Switzerland. They're playing out a third place.
Oh yeah. Tough one. We never made it so far in any tournament, so whatever.
I thought it was highly suspicious how you
Hold
it
on,
was highly
folks.
suspicious how.
We were both happy.
This is an American show here. Okay, we can't be having your fancy European sports nonsense on here. Get out of here.
Okay, in that case, America are probably going to win the Women's World Cup, which just started today as well.
Ah, that's cool. So you would know more about that than I would. But yeah, Theo, thanks again for being on, and I look forward to hearing from you again.
Guys.
Yeah.
Sure.
Thanks, Theo.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Yeah, that's the intersection of like, okay, so like, you know, a lot of times we talk about, you know what I think of? This reminds me of the conversation we have about like, you know, when is it the right time to talk to somebody about like religion and like their political beliefs and stuff? Well, mostly religion, right? Because like in some way, a religion kind of benefits people, even if it can be shown to be false in some sort of way, you know, like some sort of religious belief. And like if you're tearing that down for somebody, like that can cause harm in some ways, right? And it's like, at what point do we? I mean, you could stretch that into saying that's violating some sort of autonomy in some way, maybe. You know, like especially like you know, there's cultural groups and stuff. I was thinking of that guy who went to some remote tribe over off. I think it was like off the coast of India earlier this year, I think it was. And like he was trying to evangelize to them, right? Even though it was like super illegal to go there and he couldn't do that. Like that would be like, you know, some would call that a violation of this kind of culture. And I mean, it definitely a violation of the national laws there, right? Because he super wasn't allowed to go there. But, you know, like we're kind of protecting these people and protecting their way of life, even though it is different from ours. And in some ways, we wouldn't encourage in our own society, right?
I mean, that specific example is fascinating. I don't know how true the actual framing of the conversation was. It's sort of, you know, that bit in The Hobbit, like that meme where he's off on an adventure. He's like, yeah, let's go on an adventure. It was sort of like, it was framed like that. Like this guy was just taking a boat and he was like, yeah, let's spread religion. And it probably wasn't like that.
No, yeah, it was a really interesting story. I won't get into it here, but yeah, if you hadn't heard of that, definitely look that. I can't remember the guy's name, but yeah, a guy was a evangelist going to it. He was just set on converting the world, and he was like, here's like one of the only untouched people groups on earth. Let's go do it. Let's go convert him. And then he died because they like shot arrows at him, I think, and killed him.
Yeah, I think
supposed to go there.
Previous people that went to that particular island went there in they had some form of iron on them, and they like kick-started their Iron Age because they had rocked up and they'd been killed or whatever, and they like scavenged the boat or something. It's bizarre.
Yeah,
it's like the whole idea of going back in time to like give somebody a technology from today, like giving someone an iPhone 200 years ago. What would have happened?
Right. Well, yeah, people say that, but then it's also like, well, it wouldn't have cell phone service, and you wouldn't be able to charge it, so it wouldn't do too much too fast. I guess if
you know what I mean.
Yeah, I know. But
an egg whisk.
There's a picture. We really need to go on, but there is a picture like from a few years ago of like a woman who appears to be holding like a cell phone in her hands, and it was like from like the 1920s or something, when really it was just some sort of like hearing aid device from back then that they don't really use now. And people are like, oh, she's a time traveler. She has a cell phone. It's like, well, there wouldn't be any cell phone towers. Like, who is she going to be calling? Like, unless it's like it's an interdimensional traveling communication device, but I don't know. Anyway, I want to go to our next caller here. This is Dylan in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Dylan, what's up?
Hi.
Hey.
Am I on?
Yes, you're on. What's going on, man?
Hey. So you may or may not remember me, but I've been a fan for quite a while. I mean, I've actually been a fan since you started, but I saw you live a while ago and got a mug, which
hell
is
yeah,
still the most kick-ass mug ever.
Yeah, dude.
I wanted to talk about paranormal investigations or paranormal versus supernatural.
Perfect.
Stuff.
Yeah, tell me about that.
All right. To start with, the definition that I found, just Google it. paranormal was events that are attributed to something beyond the scope of normal scientific understanding.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I buy that. I think that makes sense to me. Where supernatural is events attributed to something beyond scientific laws and understanding. So they're pretty much the same thing. The operative word there is paranormal says beyond the scope of normal scientific understanding.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the difference when you're talking about things like crop circles, Bigfoot, anything, cryptozoology, UFOs, whatever. It's not beyond scientific investigation. It's just beyond our abilities right now.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's not beyond our abilities, but we just haven't had that evidence because these things don't really exist.
Yeah, because we don't understand dark matter. That doesn't necessarily make it like paranormal, right? Or even supernatural.
Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. And I would say it's not, I would say by definition, to me, things that are supernatural are fictional because if it's not based in reality, if it's not based in the natural world, then it's just not real and I don't need to talk about it.
Okay. Yeah.
So since you have this interest in paranormal stuff,
I do.
I realized that maybe the question you should be asking is not what do you believe and why, but what do you not believe?
Okay.
Because when you're investigating paranormal claims, and really any scientific investigation, but especially fringe science, you have to start with what is it not? And I think a good example that I could use, and I'm pretty sure I've heard you reference him, is James Randi.
Uh-huh.
If you've heard of him.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So he does a really good job. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. The guy, just to interrupt, the James Randi, the guy who takes a bottle of homeopathic pills on stage and pretends, he doesn't tell his audience, but he takes them. And he's like, oh, yeah, these are pills. I'm just going to take these, and gets on with his talk.
Yeah, it takes the whole bottle, right? Yeah, it does. Peter Randi. Peter Randi. James Randi's done some crazy stuff. Yeah. In case you're not familiar, like he exposed Peter Popoff that he was claiming that he was getting stuff from God, and he found like the radio frequency that he was getting into his ear. And he has some crazy magic tricks and stuff online. He's an interesting character.
Yeah, and he does a lot of these disprovals. That's what as far as I know, that's what he got famous for, was those sort of proving that psychic, he had 10 boxes and he's like, okay, well, there's a gold coin in one of these boxes. Beat random chance. And normally people couldn't beat random chance. Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, he wasn't proving that they didn't have those powers, but he, in one instance, there was this guy that was trying to turn pages of a phone book, and he put pieces of paper right in front of the phone book to make it clear whether or not the guy was using his breath to turn those pages.
Right. Yeah. So I'm kind of not. Yeah. I'm just kind of getting a sense here of your call in general, Dylan. Like, so are you saying that I, as a skeptical person, should talk more about what I don't believe rather than I do believe? Is that what you're kind of getting at?
No. I'm just saying, so when I called in before and talked about crop circles.
Right. I do remember that.
And I have gone back and done some more research, and I've gotten caught up in a couple other things on the way. I just looked into those pyramids in Antarctica that people were reporting, which is not, obviously those are easy to disprove.
Oh,
but
okay.
Things like,
that's a new one for me.
Yeah, that was a story to Alien 1, wasn't it?
I don't know. Don't go into that tangent, though. Keep going. Keep trucking along. Okay. Ignore us.
No, so just anything. So, I think crop circles are a good example because or even extraterrestrials are a better example. And I don't associate crop circles with extraterrestrials. I don't have a position onto whether or not extraterrestrials exist, but I know what they are not.
Mm.
And that's any portrayal of an alien that I've ever seen in the media.
Yeah. You know, it seems to me that...
And I can...
Yeah, I was just going to say, you know, the whole crop circle thing is interesting to me because it seems to me if there was some sort of extraterrestrial life or even like extra-dimensional life, the last thing we would find out about them is that they're leaving crop circles all over the globe. Like, it seems like we would have some other information about them first before finding all of this other stuff, right? I don't know. That's just my first inclination.
No, I think so too. The reason why crop circles interest me is not what I think caused them, but what I know did not cause them.
Okay.
And there are crop circles on the planet that I know were not made with boards and planks. Now, they may have still been made by people, but they would have been people with some sort of weird radiation gun, maybe, or some sort of a drone that emitted really high energy and high temperature radiation, something like that. I wouldn't make that. I wouldn't say it is that, but I know for sure that it's not boards and planks. I'm also pretty sure that crop circles are not extraterrestrials.
Okay.
I can say that pretty much for certain.
So
it's not an extraterrestrial force.
And let me ask you, just for consistency's sake, why do you not think it's extraterrestrials? Why do you choose humans over extraterrestrials?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily say it is humans, but I would say it's not extraterrestrials for the same reasons you're saying. Extraterrestrials is something that, I mean, they may exist, but I do think that if they were coming down, if extraterrestrials are making crop circles at the rate that crop circles are appearing, we would definitely have evidence of that. We would have some sort of footage that was verifiable and from, many people or something. We'd have something to go on, is my assumption. The reason why the strongest reason why I don't think crop circles are made by extraterrestrials is because there's never been any evidence of any sentient extraterrestrial being on Earth. So I just don't think we should go there.
Yeah, like we've always seen crop circles. We've never seen the rest of the stuff that should come with the crop circles if it's extraterrestrials, right? Yeah.
Right. If it's extraterrestrials, you'd expect to see some giant, hopefully colorful light beam or something, or maybe just a big sign that's saying, here's where the aliens keep their stuff.
Yeah. Well, it's like, okay, so if are they trying to make a message to us or not? Because like, unless they're trying to live in the realm of plausible deniability, but it's like, what's the point of that, right? Like, why would an alien, if they're trying to send a message to us, why would they want to be as ambiguous as with a crop circle? Like, we got cell phones, like they can text us or something. I don't know. Like,
we have like the crop circles have some crop circle, and that's one of the things that's really interesting. Mm-hmm. The more you look at them, the higher the complexity becomes apparent. The more the complexity becomes apparent, because some of the crop circles are very, very mathematically complex, and obviously we, as humans, we have the ability to understand those mathematical relationships. Like there'll be things where there's a single tangent line that's hitting like 4 different circles or something. I don't know if that means anything to you.
When it comes to like that kind of stuff, I wish we talked about like ghosts and stuff more. Back in the day, I was really into like Ghost Hunter and stuff like that. Only just because I love that stuff, dude. And only because I lived in the ambiguity as a kid where I didn't really know whether or not ghosts were like real. And so, it's really exciting and entertaining. Like, ooh, like what are they going to find next? And then you learn a little later about, the most of it's faked and stuff like that. And then it becomes like, wow, like these are just grown men running around in an old building, like making some spooky noises and stuff like that.
Yeah.
It's kind of a different perspective after a while. But the alien stuff, man, I feel like because I feel like the common person has like a ghost belief. I feel like that's more common. I feel like when you get into alien territory, you start to the parts of humanity kind of come out a little bit. You know what I mean? You hear some of the weirder stories with aliens than you do with ghosts.
Yeah, and I don't really think that I've ever heard somebody relay. Well, okay, they're actually, I've done a fair amount of research into extraterrestrials. The stories that I find the most interesting are the stories that are kind of the least understandable, where like an alien will appear that's like looks like a giant, calcified turd or something, and it just exists, and we don't. It's just like, what the hell was that? I don't know, but that's what happened. And not that I think those are real either. I mean, that's something that I dismiss pretty much offhand. Anytime someone presents just eyewitness testimony, it's a fun story, but that's pretty much the end of it.
Sure.
And that's why. So, as far as extraterrestrials, I know for a fact that extraterrestrials, if they exist, would not be bipedal animals that look. I mean, all the extraterrestrials you see in movies basically look like humans. And I'm assuming, do both of you guys just accept kind of evolution from abiogenesis or whatever, that first we had self-replicating RNA, which led to DNA, which led to
Sure. Are you explaining? Are you saying why specifically aliens wouldn't be bipedal? Because that's a very specific claim, and I'm curious why you think that.
Yeah, so they wouldn't be bipedal because you'd have to. So you start at the very basis of life, right? Because outside of some weird hypothesis like ancient aliens, there's not really a reason to believe that life on another planet would resemble our life at all.
Mm-hmm.
So to make any estimation of what life would look like, we would have to kind of build, we would have to model it from scratch based on something other than our own carbon-based backbone. Like, it might even still be a carbon-based chemistry, but I don't think it would be DNA, because the odds of that occurring are basically zero. They're not odds that you would have to consider. A DNA molecule is something that is not going to just happen on another planet. Unless, there's like, obviously there are things that could make me change my mind. But based on what I know about chemistry, how those molecules form is based on random chance and just stabilities in the molecular shape. So the fact that anything that you would see would resemble life on Earth is basically a zero chance.
Yeah,
in my mind.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Because there's so much in between.
That seems to make the most amount of sense to me. But I want to turn the mic over to David and see his thoughts on this. The crop circle phenomenon. I'm sure that's not something you talk about too much on the David Worley podcast, huh?
Yeah, the crop circles maybe not so much. I am very interested in this argument to do with aliens, though, because have you heard, Dylan, about Neil deGrasse Tyson's speech about whether there's going to be like alien life out there or not?
No, I haven't heard that, but I'd be pretty interested to. I'll probably bookmark it right now.
Yeah, it should be fairly easy to find. So the basic gist of it is the most common elements in the universe that we know of are things like hydrogen, carbon, oxygen, and helium, which doesn't interact with anything. Now, if you put those, I don't know, I can't remember from top of my head because it is 2 a.m, but if you put all those in order of how common they are, I think hydrogen would definitely be at the top. You end up with the exact same list of all of those elements in us. So the most common element in us is hydrogen, etc.
Yeah, definitely.
And so it stands to reason that
bonds are common. We've seen those on other planets as well. So we might find carbon-hydrogen bonds.
Yeah, so
I mean,
to extend that
so-
logic. Oh, you can go for it if you like.
No, I'm sorry I cut you off. I mean, I was just saying that's what most of our chemistry is based on, is carbon-hydrogen bonds, and then we pull our energy from there. You know, that's how our body uses ATP. We're breaking those bonds. And so I do think that would be pretty common, because we've seen those sorts of things, I think, in weather patterns and also on Mars. But I don't know the chances of, if this is where you're going, and you can stop me at any time, because I am sorry I cut you off. If where you're going was the chances of DNA occurring could be high, I would argue that they are not high. And that is something that I don't know for a fact, but I am making the argument, I think, I'm also trying to keep the conversation going and everything. So
Yeah.
I would base that on the fact that we are trying to do this. We've been trying to create RNA from a soup for a really long time. I mean, not too long, and I think eventually we might get it right. But that's what I'm kind of waiting to see, because I think most likely we'll find out that there's other types of chemistry, other types of molecules with similar chemistry, where the molecule itself, if it can duplicate, it might also be able to self-modify and self-replicate. And I think, to me, in a way, that's really the beginning of life.
Yeah. I think you're right. If we ever did find some sort of extraterrestrial life, it would probably be on the smaller scale, right? Probably be not as developed, right? We definitely wouldn't be finding, some aliens that are going to impregnate us or anything like that, right? I mean, we could. I'm not saying that we wouldn't, but I get what you're saying, and this is the same thing I've read as well about the complexity of our molecules and stuff. The fact that even now today we have not successfully been able to completely create the same conditions that RNA might have been at millions of years ago. I know that there were experiments that have been done as early as the 60s and stuff to kind of get this stuff right. But there is still.
Well, we think we have the right conditions. We just haven't gotten the right molecules out.
Right. Yeah, and
that's
right. And there's still the kind of mystery there, which is kind of inspiring. I do wonder if we were able to do that tomorrow, how much that would affect kind of the way that we think about evolution, the way that we think about ourselves and the universe and stuff like that, if that would even change people's minds. Because I do know that there are people who point this out as an argument that say, well, see, not even the atheist scientists can build the molecules together yet, right? And it's like, well, that's because this is God's creation, and we're super special and unique and magical, and everything is awesome. But but they failed to realize how far we have come as far as like synthesizing proteins and making all kinds of artificial.
Yeah, and we can. Yeah, we are doing a good job of investigating these sorts of things, I think. But I think, as far as, I guess, thanks for letting me be on so long. I'll let you guys go and take another caller. But, I just think maybe as far as truth wanted, like kind of the best way to get at the truth might be asking, what people don't believe and how do you know?
Yeah, I like asking those kinds of questions too, and you're right. Maybe I need to ask those kinds of questions more. I think I tried to incorporate it in my question diet, let's say, on this show, because I want to be able to cover our bases, right? I do talk to a lot of atheists on here, but I'll occasionally ask, like, oh, why don't you believe in God or aliens or ghosts or whatever? Because you may find that, there's going to be a common thread of reasons, but every once in a while you'll find that people may share the same beliefs as you do, but they've come to it in a completely different way. And that way may be better or worse than the one that you've already had. I'd rather people believe, I wouldn't want to live in a world where people believe in the same things as I do for bad reasons, right? I want people to believe in things for good reasons. And of course, how we determine good reasons is a whole other discussion. But the point is, it's not enough for people to think the same way that I do. It all comes down to the whys, right? The hows and the why kinds of questions. And I definitely think we need to ask more of those kinds of questions in general. Well, Dylan, thanks again for calling. I look forward to hearing from you again. I hope you enjoy that mug, man. Not a lot of those.
Oh, I do.
Cool.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, take care, dude, and can't wait to hear from you again.
Cool, thanks a lot, guys.
Where can people find these mugs, Dan?
Good question. So Dylan was here in studio when that happened. When we were first launching Truth Wanted, we made just a couple of mugs, and just to kind of see what they looked like. We never made any after that, and we've talked for so long about making merch. If you really want merch, send an email address to truth@atheist-community.org and let the people here know, because let the people speak that there's a need and a want for this kind of stuff, because man, I think the mugs look pretty cool. I just put mine over in the sink over there, but yeah, man, some more merch I think would be cool. I would always thought a baseball hat or something that has the Truth Wanted logo on there would be neat. Would you wear that on your show, David?
No.
Fair enough.
I was going to actually say, anyone in the comments that would like a mug and would be interested in Dan getting more mugs, just put a little cup of tea emoji for me, just to keep me going.
There you go. Before we go to the next call, I do want to know, David, why don't you believe in aliens, man? How come you're not on board with the crop circles? They're clearly telling you.
Well, hold on a second. I was cut off just before I was going to say that they're actually here. No, I was gonna bring up the if I've got a quick minute.
Yeah.
Before we go to another call, yeah. The Fermi Paradox and I think it's Fraunhofer lines. I don't know if you're aware of both of them.
Yes, I'm aware, but you should explain for the audience very quickly.
Sure. So the Fermi Paradox is the paradox that says intelligent life does exist in the universe. If we have a scale of intelligence and the units is, say, one level of intelligence is human, then clearly that exists, but the frequency with which it actually lasts before it kills itself off, self-destructs, climate change kills it, whatever it may be, they never grow big enough to actually meet each other in the universe. So they might be popping up all the time, and there might be intelligent life forms more intelligent than us slightly, or slightly less intelligent than us, but we never meet each other because we're so far apart, and we're not common enough.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so the Fraunhofer lines is a different idea where you shine light through a particular element and different colors come out the other end. And so hydrogen has its own signature, as it were.
Yeah.
And so when you have the sun of a particular planet shining through its atmosphere, and then that light then reaches Earth, we can see what's in that atmosphere. And we can see that there are exoplanets that NASA are recording where they do have similar atmospheres to us. So it could be possible that, sorry, do cut me off, but quickly, 20 seconds. The only reason there would be oxygen, as far as we're aware, the only naturally recurring oxygen in the universe is because of photosynthesis and because there is plant life. And so if we're finding oxygen elsewhere, there's one of two possibilities. Either it's because of a plant life of some sort on that planet, or it could be just some new process that we're unaware of.
Yeah, fascinating stuff. And just a quick call to action. Look, if you believe aliens, Bigfoot, Chupacabra, Deer Man, crazy stuff at Area 51, Bermuda Triangle, if you believe any of that stuff, this is the show to call. Please. I love that stuff. I don't get to talk about that enough. I wish somebody told me their ghost story on here. I want to talk about ghosts, man. Let's just have a ghost hour. I'm down for that.
Yeah,
Man,
that's fun.
I've been, I used to live in New Orleans, they got all kinds of ghost tours and stuff there. Man, they tell all kinds of BS stories about people that used to live there and stuff, try to freak people out. And, I love that kind of thing, man. I think it's great. And I wish the show had more calls like that. But that's up to you, viewers. You have to bring in the great calls for us to talk about that stuff. Because if it's weird and somebody believes it, I want to know about it. That's my MO, right? I do want to go to Adam now in North Carolina. Adam, you were on the show now. What's up?
I'm going to disappoint you, Dan. I don't believe in ghosts. I do think aliens are possible, but I have no reason to believe in ghosts.
Well, Adam, I believe in you. So let's call it at that, huh?
I'm calling in today to talk about Apologists. And it's so funny because I was watching a live chat, and it really made me realize there's a gentleman there. Let's call him F. Christian. First name, it's Frank Christian. I don't think his name is actually Frank Christian. Mm-hmm. But he's in there kind of just preaching, which is all right. But everyone's saying to him, why do you think this? And he's just, Jesus loves you, Jesus loves you. And maybe he's just hoeing on us. But I've talked to a lot of apologists as of late, and every time I talk to them, they tell me the reasons they believe, hopefully. And it's always these recycled arguments. I guess this is why I'm so frustrated. I'm calling into Truth Wanted to air my frustration to apologists, to Matt Slick, and to all the other apologists out there. When they talk about prophecy, and then we talk to them about it, and we ask them, well, what does prophecy tell you about the event? Does it tell you why it happened? And eventually you learn that prophecy isn't a good way to get to God, at least in my opinion. Mm-hmm. And then a week later, you see them somewhere else using this. And I find it frustrating. I don't know how to deal with this. Your thoughts?
Man, what a great question. I've encountered this before. You tell people hey, this isn't a good idea and stuff. I used to hang out at, when I was in college, at a local apologist club, believe it or not. And I hung out with some of my atheist friends, so I wasn't the only one there. But, we would get into discussions with these guys till 3 o'clock in the morning, just going on some stuff. I can think of one time, well, more than one time, I guess, a few times where I've actually changed some people's minds while having doing more of the kind of argument, kind of debate style of things. But the other thing too was, this was a group of people who were fairly young, around my age, college aged. And I have a feeling that the older you get and the longer you stay in a lot of these kinds of communities, the more your beliefs kind of solidify, especially if you're constantly surrounding yourself by people who, think like you and stuff like that. Everybody does this, of course. I have to make that caveat, obviously. But, I know some, again, we were talking about believing things for the right reasons. I know some people who don't believe in God for not very good reasons. They said some stuff that's just kind of questionable, or even just some personal experience stuff. If personal experience arguments shouldn't work for believing in God, then it shouldn't work for not believing in God in the same way, right? I think there just needs to be more data in general. But anyway, your question is more about how to deal with the apologists. And my first response is, well, you kind of have to look for them if you really want to have conversations with them for most of the time, right? I would say the average American probably doesn't even know what apologists are or what they do. I think we encounter it more because we're kind of in those circles and stuff. We kind of see them more. So the first thing would be just go do something else. But that's not why you're asking me, right? You're saying you're seeing these people. I mean, they're in my chat and stuff too. Man, I think what you're doing is good. Just asking. I think people are more receptive to answering questions that you might ask them than you making some sort of statement of fact. Because, questions, unless it's a question they're ready to springboard on because they've heard it a million times, questions usually make us stop and think more than somebody making a point that maybe they already have an argument that they've read about somewhere, right? So again, I mean, that goes back to street epistemology stuff, right? And it sounds like you guys are doing a good job by asking the questions, but only an honest person can really respond to those questions in any meaningful way. And some people, you just have to sit down and realize they're just not going to be honest. It sounds like this guy may not be honest with you in the way that he's doing things. And that's really sad. And I think it's something people should, just kind of expect more and just kind of move on from, unfortunately. people are always surprised by the amount of BS people can spew out on the daily. But then you have people like Peter Popoff and like some of these other guys who literally make careers out of doing it. And people are just surprised. They're like, well, how can so many people believe this stuff? And it's because, like, well, when you do something long enough, people start to think that there's something to it, right? It's kind of like faking it till you make it. And if you surround yourself with other people who think the same way, it just kind of goes to that effect. So I don't know if that's helpful. I guess in summary, right? Choose questions over answers first, right? I think questions can be stronger because giving answers causes people to look in what they already know to be true or the responses they're already trained at. But questions, they may have some responses to those, but not always. It depends on the kind of questions you're asking. Really dig deep onto why that person is believing what they're believing. Try to get them on a level that is beyond surface level, beyond the kind of stuff that they're hearing all the time. And maybe you'll get somewhere, or maybe follow along with their arguments and see if it holds up to, the kind of questions you got. Anyway, that's all I got on it. What do you think, David?
I find it particularly odd that they'd even self-identify as apologists. It's like, but to coin a phrase over here, when Leave voters want to sort of diss the Remain voters, they'll call us Ramoners. So we're moaning about the result.
Yeah.
And I don't self-identify as a Ramoner.
Well, so there's
weird.
The reason for that is because the Greek word for the kind of defense of the faith, I believe, is like apologia, or like, hey, that's where apologia, the YouTuber, gets his name, right? Okay. It stems from a certain root word. That might not be the exact word, but that's the reason why they call themselves apologists. It's not necessarily because they're apologizing for something. It's just it shares that same kind of linguistic roots.
So to add to that as well, there's another term called Europhile, for anyone who's pro-EU, and obviously that sounds a lot like paedophile. So I don't like to use the word Europhile either, because that has a negative connotation in people's heads.
Well, it's the file part, right? File just means liking or something, like philanthropist is something, file, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's whatever gets triggered. But this was a minor point. Based on the meeting apologists, I didn't actually realize they were that rare in America. I would have thought they would be far more common. We're now majority
I would say
non-believer in the UK.
The average Christian, I mean, I don't have any studies to back this up. I would say, though, that the average Christian either doesn't know or really doesn't care about most apologetics. I'd say most of them just go to church and then they just hear some stuff, but like they're not really doing the legwork as far as book reading and stuff. That might change if you're from I come from. I didn't come from like a fundamentalist background, so maybe you start to hear some of that stuff more if you're from that kind of area. But in general, if I went outside on the street and asked people what they think of apologists or apologetics in general, I'd say 99% of them probably wouldn't even know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, again, it's one of those things where I'm definitely not as well versed. I think I am aware of the specific arguments that they make. Say, for example, if someone were to say the Kalam cosmological argument like a month ago, I wouldn't know what you're on about. But if you're talking about like everything has a cause, therefore universe has a cause, or like that's essentially the Kalam cosmological. So I can understand the argument itself. I'm not so good with names.
Yeah, I it's so funny because as an atheist, I've gotten to be friends with more apologists than I ever did when I was a Christian. Because they kind of, some of them want to talk to me and see what I think about things. I will say that the ones that I found to be more honest, I think I found some leeway with in some areas, and more places that I agree with on than others. I don't want to name specific names here because I don't know if they would agree with me that I've changed their minds on things, even though I think I have. But Yeah, that's also because I've developed a personal relationship with some of these people. I think when most people are seeing apologists on the internet and stuff, they're leaving a Twitter comment or something, and then they move on with their lives. I don't know about you, but most Twitter comments, they might fuel curiosity in me, but like one single comment isn't going to completely change my worldview on everything I've ever believed in, right? Even if it's true, even if it's like a super good point, I think human beings just really don't work like that. You know, our biases and our comfort and just the way that we operate kind of prevents us from changing at a moment's notice, for better or for worse. I wouldn't want people to just completely turn their lives around just because they saw something on Twitter, but I would want them to be curious about something, and I would want them to research something more and to figure something out. So I know a lot of people who get frustrated with talking to these kinds of people, and yeah, I get it, man. Like, it's the same kind of stuff that we see all the time, but you know, maybe it's about the approach that needs to be changed, and not necessarily the arguments. Maybe you're making good points, but maybe it's the presentation that's a little bit off. Maybe there's a disconnect.
Absolutely.
You know?
Yeah, there's something that is to be said about tone and the way certain people come across. So I think certain people like Ben Shapiro or Jordan Peterson or these sorts of popular people, they come across in the right tone, but their substance isn't necessarily there. I'm not sure if you saw a UK interview with somebody called Andrew Neil, who was interviewing Ben Shapiro, and he was being taken apart by Andrew Neil, and he eventually stormed off, and he's admitted since that he got that interview completely wrong. And when people aren't successfully challenged, that's when people get slightly uppity about platforming certain people because they have particular views that aren't being successfully challenged. Well, and then the assumption is that those ideas are now spreading because of you.
Yeah, I believe in that particular case, I think Ben Shapiro thought that Neil was a super left-leaning guy when that actually wasn't true, right? So, like, think of think about how our biases and our presumptions are already going into effect in the conversations before they even happen, right? And a strategy. I mean, like, gosh, I think people would change their minds about atheists and atheism if you started to have conversations with people and stuff before they actually realize you're an atheist. I think I've seen a difference in the quality of my conversations before I reveal what necessarily I think about something, and talking to somebody and maybe asking questions or bringing up other points before they've officially identified me. Because when you put a label on something, right, you're putting people in a box, and you're there's some part in the human brain that kind of says, well, even if this person makes this X point, right, they're still from in this box. So, you know, you have to take what they say with a grain of salt, right? They can't be right about, you know, everything, right? A clock is right twice a day, stuff like that, right? And we have a tendency to do this as people. I think, like, we're interested in, you know, like, even before a politician speaks on the news and stuff like that, you know, or they have like these stuff on CNN and stuff, you know, they always have the D or the R in the parentheses, at least with American politics, to kind of let you know, like, oh, this is what you should already think about this person before they even had a chance to speak, right? Like, your judgments are immediately going to be flaring up as soon as you see just one of those little letters. And it's fascinating to see how we could probably do the same thing with our religious beliefs, right?
Yeah, is it Adam that's still there?
Yeah, so he actually dropped just a few minutes ago, but I decided to keep this conversation going because it was kind of interesting. But yeah, Adam, if you're still out there, thanks for bringing this topic up. I hope what we're saying is useful. And, you know, it's a learning process for everybody, I think. We're all kind of living in the world together. We're all trying to survive and see what fits best. I'll tell you, in my experience with talking to people and here in real life, the benefit of the doubt just has to be given all the time, man. If somebody talked to me the way that I see some people talked to people about this kind of stuff a few years ago, about the stuff that I believe, I know that would have been kind of a turnoff. And I get that. There's a merit to the rhetoric that we sometimes bring to people, and the kind of attitudes that we have when we're kind of fierce and we're fired up about stuff. But there's also people that look at that and say like, wow, I don't know, and maybe it's tone policing, but like, yeah, like that tone is kind of making me feel differently about all of this. And it kind of turns some people off. So there's different strategies for different situations. People are not one size fit all locks with, or we're not keys. Wait a minute. Let me try this metaphor again. There's not one single method that works on everybody. And that's a good thing, right? Because then we could like mind control each other all the time, and that wouldn't be good.
Yeah, the one size fits all is the one that you're.
Yeah. Well, we're not one size fits all creatures when it comes to convincing people. But it's amazing how bad people are at it. You know, if you already start off with a belief that the world is millions of years old with like evolution and stuff, like what I grew up with, like the creation stuff was never very convincing to me. But I could see how if you grew up with the other stuff first, you know, I could see how that could inform your worldview, right? Just as an example.
Yeah, I forgot what I was going to say now. I was going to go on to how debates versus discussions. So when we have these sorts of discussions and we stay very calm and we allow everyone else to fully elaborate on their point with the expectation of being given the time to elaborate ourselves, it produces a much more fruitful conversation. So, for example, the most pertinent example for me is when I had Cosmic Skeptic on. I didn't interrupt him for just 10 minutes on free will. Just let him elaborate, let him go over the whole spiel, and then I'll just make notes and I'll go through them one by one, because that's a more productive conversation. Whereas a debate might be something along the lines of interrupting quite a lot, getting in each other's face, sounding quite good, responding quickly, and if you hesitate, well, that's a point for me. It's like that sort of mindset. Whereas I much prefer to have the discussions; they're much more fruitful.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I saw that Tim, who's called into the show before, was trying to call earlier, and his note was he said that he used to attend a straight pride event, and I really wanted to hear what that story was. Unfortunately, he stopped calling earlier. But Tim, if you're out there, definitely catch up with us on that next time, because I want to know what that's like. Like, what do you do at one of those events, right? That's crazy to me. But anyway, I think that about wraps it up now for this show. We're kind of getting to the tail end here. David, where can people find you at?
They can find me at WorleyDR on Twitter. So my surname, obviously WorleyDR. And I'm sure if people are following Dan, you've retweeted with my name in it, so people can find me there. And the DRP channel, I'll quickly type something in the comments as well, so people can just go through that. Also type in WorleyDR podcast or something along those lines. And then, basically nothing else, actually. I'm not on Reddit or Discord or any of those sorts of things. So.
Cool. Yeah, definitely check out his channel if you are into interviews and stuff and you like to see some big names talk up for quite a long time for some cases, right? A couple hours for some of your interviews, which is pretty cool. So
I did... sorry to interrupt. Me saying not interrupting, and then I do. I had a 3.5 hour one with Carl Curtis and a 4 hour one with Lavender Lady, Diana. So they can go on for a while, but there's also ones a half hour, and I cut them up into clips anyway, which are more palatable. So like Shannon Q on incels was Monday's clip. It's like 10 minutes. So. Yeah. That seems to draw a lot more views that way, rather than huge formats.
Right. Well, cool, man. I'm glad to have you on, man. I'd love to have you on again some other time. We could definitely, talk about that at a later date. But in case this is your first time listening or watching to the show, this is Truth Wanted. We do this every week live at 7 o'clock Central Time. I am Objectively Dan, host of the show. You can find me on Twitter at ObjectivelyDan. If you have any inquiries into the show, you can email me at truth@atheist-community.org. We are available on iTunes, Spotify, Spreaker, and wherever else you get your podcasts. And we're also here on YouTube, where you can watch the video clips of the show, where we try to upload clips every week and have a new show for you every week with a special new guest. So far, we've been pretty consistent in having new guests every single time, which I'm really excited about. One of these days, I wonder, am I ever going to run out of people? But then I always find more people to be on. So it is really wonderful. And there is a Patreon as well. If you go to patreon.com/truthwanted, if you want to support the show, as I always say, I do not personally receive any money from that Patreon. All of that goes towards making the show and the ACA a better place. David, is there anything else you want to say before we head off here?
Check out mugs that Dan is selling.
We need Truth Wanted merch. I've been trying to make that a thing for a long time. I would wear my stuff all the time, everywhere. If I had merch, I think that'd be the coolest thing. God, we need to make that happen. All right, I'm gonna talk to some people tonight. We'll try to see about making that thing happen. But until next time, folks, always keep wanting the truth, and I'll see you again next week.